From the point in time where my father had first been diagnosed until the date of his death was about 6 weeks. God, if you're really there and if you really care about me and you love me, I need you to show up in my life because I'm scared. I decided that in that moment, I was going to give everything, and I mean everything, to Jesus Christ. My father, Bryce, struggled with alcoholism, anger and violence. One of the consequences of my father's lifestyle led him up in prison. My dad was found on the floor of his prison cell from a blood clot that had formed in his brainstem. The consequence of this stroke meant that he had severed all communication from his brain to the rest of his body, which landed him as a quadriplegic for the rest of his life. But by a miracle, about 7 years after, my mother conceived and bore a child, and that was me, Bryce Davis Jr., aka the Miracle Child. So from a very young age, I spent most of my time just hanging out at the skate parks with the boys and just getting up to no good. Around the age of 11 years old, my father fell sick again, and this time the sickness was lung cancer. From the point in time where my father had first been diagnosed when he fell sick until the date of his death was about 6 weeks. So it was a very short period of time, not much time to sort of process and comprehend what was happening, especially at the age of 11 years old. Definitely now in hindsight, I can see that that was a turning point for me, and I had started to go and to mask the pain with destructive habits, and I started getting into drinking and smoking and other substances from a very young age. And it didn't take long for me to develop a real hatred towards God and towards family and towards a lot of things that were good for me. I just didn't want them in my life anymore, and so I ended up blaming God for all of my pain and suffering that I was experiencing in life. Once I had actually spoken into existence that I no longer wanted anything to do with God, I feel that I was then allowed to go through certain things, and I then found myself in the grip and under the control of a demonic presence. I'd completely lost control over my body, and I just felt this spirit enter me and take over me. And I remember the shed kind of shaking and all of these things, just this chaotic experience where I'd even ripped the denim jeans off one of my friend's legs like it was a piece of paper in this wrestle to try and gain control back over my own body. And all I could do was cry out to Jesus. And in that moment, thank God that He does not hold a grudge, because as soon as I called out to Jesus, He was there. Everything just went quiet. Everything just went peaceful. And I was back in my own body, and I had control over myself again. And I remember the 2 Christian friends that had come to visit me were just looking at me with this look like we all kind of knew what had just happened. And so we left that shed and we had a conversation. They prayed for me. A couple of days after that experience, that I found myself walking down to the shop just to buy a can of Coke. And I remember everything had just gotten too much and it was overwhelming me. And I remember just breaking down crying. In that moment was probably the first time in years that I'd actually humbled myself enough to then ask God to really help me and show up in my life. I just remember in that moment humbling myself and saying, God, if you're really there and if you really care about me and you love me, I need you to show up in my life because I'm scared. So I knew that my brother was going to be camping for a week, and so I felt led to go there and to meet with him. I got reconnected, and I just had a great time. And I remember one of the conversations that I was having with a family friend. And that family friend had asked me, hey Bryce, how's life? I remember sitting there taking a deep breath, and I said, okay, let's talk about it. For the next 4 hours, I don't know exactly how long, it was a long time, we sat there and I just poured my heart out and I just told them everything that had been happening in my life. And then in that moment, my brother, with love in his eyes, just said, hey, we're all worried about you, man. I've seen you through your life. I've seen you through this journey. I've seen how God has moved and intervened in your life over and over again. What have you got to lose? Why don't you just give Him 12 full months of your life where you don't hold on to anything else and you give Him everything. Let this be the bottom and let God take you to where He wants to take you. And so I decided that in that moment, I was going to give everything, and I mean everything, to Jesus Christ. I went home, I quit my job, I cut off all of the things that weren't serving me, and I read Matthew 6:33 and 34, where it says to seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all of these things shall be added unto you. And so I decided that every day I was going to wake up, I was going to spend all of my energy in seeking more of God, and that I was going to put Him to the test to see if He'd hold up in His end of the deal. I remember the first 12 days, it felt like I didn't sleep a wink. I mean, I would have dozed off for hours through the nights, but I was going through withdrawals. I wasn't sleeping, I was sweating, I struggled to eat. But I just held on to the promises that God had for me. And every time that I would go out and I would immerse myself in His presence, in prayer, in reading the Word, I just felt this overwhelming peace and comfort and love that I'd never experienced before in my life. And I just knew that He was with me. And I knew that He was going to bring me through all of the challenges that were ahead of me. In the last 2 years, since I accepted the 12 months challenge, not only was I able to gain victory over addictions, over anger and depression and all these things I was suffering with, I ended up being baptized. I deepened my experience with Jesus Christ, and I allowed Him to continue to mold me and grow me into the person that He wants me to be. I thought, man, if I could just be set free from drugs and alcohol, if I could just be happier and not feel all this anger and pain, if I could just get myself healthy, that would have been a win for me. But what God was able to do for me, He gave me everything and 100 times more. So the life that I'm blessed to live today is a life that is fulfilling, it's full of peace, and it's full of purpose. I'm a support worker, but I'm also a community coordinator at the Byron Bay SDA Church. So I'm now so blessed to be living a life of freedom, a life of purpose, and a life where I know that I belong and I know that I'm eternally loved.